Hey guys, welcome to the beginning of our next unit in our biology topics, where we start talking about ecology. We're going to talk about organisms and their relationships in the wild and how they work together. There's a statement here for you to look at and think about. It says biotic and abiotic factors interact in complex ways in communities and ecosystems. If you didn't know, biotic means living things and abiotic means non-living things. We're going to talk about that soon. So I want you to take a second and think about how living things and non-living things interact in the environment. So push pause and think about that for 1 minute, and we will move on here in a minute. Okay, hopefully you had a second to think about that. Um, let's look at our essential questions for this topic, for this section. They say, what is the difference between abiotic factors and biotic factors? Kind of gave that away for you a little bit already. What are the interactions between the levels of biological communities? And what's the difference between an organism's habitat and its niche? Um, you can say niche, some people say niche, but they're both correct. It doesn't matter. Now, if you can answer these three essential questions when we are done, you know exactly what you need to know. So let's go ahead and get started here. So ecology, you've probably heard that word before. Ecology is the scientific discipline in which the relationships among living organisms and the interactions the organisms have with their environments are studied. Now, we know, or at least we're going to see, that organisms depend on other organisms and non-living things in their environment to survive. So what an ecologist does is they observe, experiment, and model using a variety of tools and methods that deal with organisms and the environment in which those organisms are found. Okay, the biosphere, this word is describing the portion of the earth that supports life. So anywhere on the planet that life is supported is part of the biosphere. This is going to include land masses, freshwater, saltwater, lower portions of the atmosphere, and even areas beneath the Earth's surface. So anywhere that supports life on Earth, that's part of the biosphere. And within the biosphere, hopefully this makes sense to you, there are biotic factors and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are living factors in an organism's environment. So all the living things you're going to find in the environment are known as biotic factors. Interactions among organisms are necessary for the survival of species in the same geographic location. Living things need other living things, as well as some non-living things. Now, abiotic factors, these are the non-living factors in an organism's environment. Organisms adapt to survive in the abiotic factors present in their natural environment. Abiotic factors are going to be things like the air and the water and rocks and soil and all the non-living things. Now, when we start talking about living things, there are certain levels of organization. So the biosphere itself is too big and too complex to study as a whole. So what ecologists have done is divide the biosphere into different levels of organization so that it's a little bit easier to study. And here are the levels. We have an organism, and then a population, then a biological community, then the ecosystem, then a biome, and then the complete biosphere. Now these levels increase in complexity as the numbers and interactions between the organisms increase. So the more and more organisms you get, you move on to the next level of organization, basically. Now, the lowest level, as it said a second ago, is the individual organism. Now, organisms of a single species that share the same geographic location at the same time, that's called a population. So let's take squirrels, for example. One squirrel is an organism, a group of the same squirrel at the same location. That's a population. Now, next we have a biological community, which is a group of interacting populations that occupy the same geographic area at the same time. So we have the squirrels and the rabbits and the trees and the flowers. Like that would be a biological community because it's different populations occupying the same space at the same time. Next, we have an ecosystem, which is a biological community and all of the abiotic factors that affect it. So we have all those groups of populations together, plus all the non-living things that affect those groups. That's the ecosystem. Next, we have a biome, which is a group of ecosystems sharing the same climate, and they have similar types of communities. Now, within an ecosystem, we have a habitat, which is the area where organisms live. So if a squirrel lives in a tree, that tree would be its habitat. Now, the word niche or niche, however you say it, it's correct either way, is the role or position that an organism has in its environment. So the squirrels, for example, the tree would be their habitat, but their niche would be going out and foraging acorns. Like, what's their role? What do they do? That's the niche. Okay. Now, within communities, there are different types of interactions. We have competition. This occurs when more than one organism uses a resource at the same time, and competition becomes stronger when resources are scarce. So let's go back to those squirrels. If there's a limited amount of trees and you have a whole bunch of squirrels and they all want the acorns, well, there's a limited amount. So there's competition. They're gonna, who's the fastest, who's the strongest, who's the smartest? Like, they're gonna compete to get those acorns. Next, we have predation. Predation is the act of one organism pursuing and consuming another organism for food. So think predator-prey relationship. So predation is when one predator is preying on another organism. So the organism that pursues the other is the predator, and the organism being pursued is the prey. Next, we have symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis is the close relationship that exists when two or more species live together. And there are three types of symbiosis. We have mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism is when both organisms in the relationship benefit. So this would be something like bees and flowers. Bees get to go to the flowers and eat the pollen, but they also move the pollen to other areas where they can cross pollinate with other plants. So that's a mutual thing where they both benefit. Commensalism, this is when one organism benefits and the other is not really helped or harmed. So think about birds living in a tree. Birds living in a tree doesn't really help or hurt the tree, but the bird benefits from getting to live in the tree. And then we have parasitism, where one organism benefits at the expense of another. This is going to be something like a leech. A leech attaches onto an organism and sucks its blood and lives off the blood. This is not beneficial and can in fact be harmful to the organism that the leech is attached to, but the leech benefits by getting its source of nutrients. Same with ticks or mosquitoes or other organisms that suck blood like this. Pretty gross stuff. And that kind of wraps up our talk for section 1. You might notice on this post that there are videos attached. You are not required to watch those videos, but they're really short and they're full of information about ecology, and they're honestly, they'd be pretty helpful to look at. So go ahead and watch those videos if you have a chance. You're not going to be punished if you don't. Also, the PowerPoint of this lesson is attached. If you need to go back and go through it a little bit slower, take your time, go through each slide, do that, or you can watch this video again, pause it, rewind it. Anything for you to learn this information. Now go ahead and find your way over to the discussion board for the week and respond to today's statement or questions, and then reply to at least 2 classmates